Yo, Trev, you know what day it is?
Yes, sir. It's Tuesday, Jay.
Well, hey, man, you know what that means.
I believe that means it's time for Tuesdays with Trevor.
Well, hit that music because it's time to get rolling, big fella. Let's go.
All right, let's go. Hello, and welcome to Tuesdays with Trevor, a show dedicated to using sports to create positive change. Be ready to get inspired, uplifted, and empowered through thought-provoking conversations specific to the world of youth sports with some of the top minds in the game. I'm your co-host, Trevor Rosenthal, MLB All-Star and single-season save record holder for the St. Louis Cardinals, along with Jason Holzer, co-founder of 40 Athletes and best-selling author. Jason, how are we doing today?
Hey, man, doing good. It's springtime. Baseball's going on, right? So weather's getting warmer. Well, hopefully it's getting warmer by now in the Midwest, but it's definitely getting lighter outside, right? Let's say that. So, what about yourself, man? Hey, who we shouting out today, Trevor?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Today, our shout out goes to First Form. Not only do they have a great line of supplements to help meet your fitness needs, but also have a great athletic apparel line as well. Check out firstform.com. Man, I agree, Jason. Not a whole lot to complain about. I actually started reading this book the last couple of days, and it ties into our guest perfectly today. As I've progressed as a professional athlete, the psychology of sports, the mindset has really fascinated me more than anything. And so I'm reading this book. The title of the book is Man's Search for Meaning, which I didn't know what I was getting into, but it's written by an actual Holocaust survivor. And listening to his story, getting a vivid picture of the conditions that he was exposed to, and then the psychology is what he really talks about and how they were able to endure and adapt to these extreme conditions that are really I can't even fathom. I mean, the best I can do is picture them from the words on the pages, but certainly the world that we live in, like you said, with the springtime headed into summer, a lot to be thankful for. And as always, the message that we're spreading here on Tuesdays with Trevor is how to take advantage of these opportunities that we're given. And our guest today, Dr. Alex, is going to break this down for us and help us as parents and coaches and athletes to understand how powerful the mind is and what we can do to take advantage. So, Jason, can you go ahead and get us up to speed? Who is joining us today?
Yeah, Dr. Alex Auerbach is on the show today. He's a licensed counseling and sports psychologist, certified mental performance consultant, and board-certified coach working in professional sports, most recently with the Toronto Raptors. But he's worked with elite teams, performers, and ranged from the NBA, NFL, Olympians, Army Special Forces, Fortune 5 companies, and venture-backed startups. We've had Dr. Alex before on our previous podcast as well, and he's just a wealth of great knowledge. And his content specifically has been some of the topics about youth sports. So, Dr. Alex, thank you for joining us today. Excited to have you on. How is things in Tucson, Arizona going?
Well, thank you guys for having me. Things in Tucson are great. We're finally getting out of the cold and into the warmth, which means it's time to go outside and have some fun and see if I can work on my throwing so I can keep up with Trevor and the history of success here. It's a pleasure to join you guys and share a little bit more.
Well, let's get right into it then. I want to start with team chemistry, right? It's something that is hard to necessarily measure, but you know when teams have it and you know when teams don't have it. So what are two things that youth coaches can focus on to help build team chemistry and a few strategies that implement them within their teams at a youth level?
Yeah, so great question. I'm glad to hear you guys are thinking about this. I mean, obviously chemistry plays such a huge part in how young athletes experience their sport, whether or not they have fun, and so it's a critical thing. For me, I break chemistry down really into two factors. The first is what we would call task cohesion, right? It's everyone understanding their role, responsibility, and how to execute, right? So even at young ages, we start doing things like putting in playbooks, right? We teach athletes simple responsibilities that they have, what their position means and how to play it. And everyone understanding their position and how it fits together, that creates a sense of task cohesion, right? It's how we best execute on the field. And then the other part is what we call social cohesion, right? It's everyone liking each other, respecting each other, getting along well. Now, as you get higher and higher in sport, right, when you get to pro sports, I'm sure you know this, Trevor, you don't necessarily have to like everyone, but you have to respect everyone. In youth sports, it is important to create a sense of liking, connection, and belonging. So strategies coaches can use on the first side, on the task cohesion, is really explaining clearly to your young athletes what their role is, and most importantly, how that role impacts the team, how it helps the team. Even if you're on the bench, for example, you're on the sideline or you're not playing every game, like that's a critical role to play to make everyone feel like they're a part of something, and for you to say support your teammates, or if you're starting, talking about how that impacts the other people around you, what your role is, can be really helpful. And often it takes a lot more explaining than we think it does, even to pro athletes, to help them understand what their role is and how it impacts their team. And so strategy one would be to spend a lot of time and effort really coaching around roles, responsibilities, the tasks of the team, and how to best execute. On the social side, it can be leaving aside time in practice or outside practice activities for people to just connect, right? So maybe that's letting the athletes just play a game, like a small-sided soccer game or something, or hacky sack before practice, right? Something that just allows them to sort of bond. There's no rules, structure, roles, or responsibilities. It's just a chance to connect. And the more that you can facilitate that kind of opportunity, the more the athletes are going to enjoy being around each other. And so if you can build those two things up, you're going to have a cohesive, nice team full of chemistry.
That's awesome. I mean, that's so throughout my career, I've been exposed to obviously a lot of different types of coaching, and I've moved through the ranks from amateur level all the way to the top, and I've seen this play out, and it's so important. But now, as a parent of 3 young athletes, I'm wondering, I'm really like excited to pick your brain as really like a parent of young athletes. So if I came to you and was asking you, hey, what can I do? Like what would be your first words of advice to me as a parent? Or in other words, like what are ways parents can positively contribute and reemphasize what the coach is doing and reemphasize that in the home?
Yeah, I mean, the research shows that the parents who have the best outcomes in sports for their kids are the most sort of relaxed, not necessarily completely hands off, but relaxed about their kids' participation in sport, right? So advice number one would be to let the coach, right? To hear those messages, to ask your athlete about what they're learning in practice. And that gives you some data, basically, right, about what to reinforce or talk about more at home. And to do the work with them to unpack what those concepts mean, right? Coaches might say something like, we want to give great effort and play really hard, right? And so asking your young athlete, hey, what does that mean to you when coach says play really hard or give great effort? And allowing them to explain without you feeling like you've got to jump in, correct, force, right? I mean, you know this, you're an incredibly high-level athlete, right? Your idea of hard work is probably much different than the average person's idea of hard work, and that's okay, but helping them understand and make those connections, that would be one thing that I would encourage. The second would be to maintain that kind of relaxed approach, right? If you look at some of the best athletes in the world in the history of specific sports, Roger Federer is a great example. Like, his parents just sort of allowed him to go where he felt like he needed to go, and they basically provided like bumpers, metaphorical bumpers on a bowling lane, right? He knew he wanted to be great. Their job was to sort of like poke and nudge him in the right direction, but not be so overbearing that they were like telling his coach how to coach him and showing up and yelling at the coach when it didn't work out well, or even being overly critical of him, except for a couple specific instances where his parents felt like they needed to, for example, like teach him a lesson about how he behaved on the floor. For the rest of the time, they were just kind of in the background, supporting, encouraging, talking about the benefits of sport, but again, not forcing themselves and being overbearing. And I think, of course, as parents, we all care about our kids' experience in sport, but actually having overly involved parents leads to kids feeling burnt out, overwhelmed, stressed about something that, especially at the youth level, is supposed to be about fun. And then finally, I'm really big on developing this idea of loving competition, right? And competition, the original meaning of the word compete comes from Latin to strive with. And then here in Western culture, we've turned it into strive against, right? Like it's me versus you. But if you can get your athlete into this mindset that it's really about being better than you were yesterday, it's about slow incremental progress, it's about the other team giving you a chance to get better and try something new, creating that love of competition can really fuel them for the long term, both in terms of becoming the best version of themselves, but also becoming a better athlete and better competitor. And so those would be the 3 things I would emphasize when I'm working with parents or talking with parents about helping their young athletes develop.
Man, I love that. It's like, you're competing against yourself. And for parents, it's to support and be involved, but not be overbearing. So that's a great way to wrap up this first segment here. And we'll be back in 20 seconds as we continue this conversation. But first, a quick word from 4D Athletes. Looking to use sports to build exceptional leaders ready for any season of life? If you're a coach or parent, check out 4dathletes.com. That's the number 4, letter D, athletes.com, where they can have online courses for parents that will teach you life skills necessary to become the best version of yourself. Regardless if you're a parent or coach, athlete, that's 4dathletes.com, and be sure to sign up for the Mamba Mentality ebook when you visit the website. Now, back to the show. Well, Dr. Alex, we are on the cusp of Mental Health Awareness Month here in May, and I want to shift a little bit to mental health. In your experience, what are some practical strategies parents and coaches can implement to promote positive mental health habits and resilience in young athletes?
Well, the first strategy is to be really mindful of your language and how you talk about things in sport, right? We have a bunch of data now that shows that coaches emphasizing things like effort, hard work, persistence, growth, progress, that leads to an athlete internalizing and developing a growth mindset. Same thing for parents, right? So thinking really intentionally about the way that you talk, how you deliver criticism, how you deliver praise, the way that you give feedback, that's the first thing, right? Especially for young athletes who may not have the attention span or ability to sit still and do something like meditate, right? A lot of the promotion of their well-being is going to come through significant people around them. And especially for young athletes, coaches and parents are the two sources, right? As you get a little bit older as a young athlete into your teenage years, then your peers start to become more of an influence. But if we're thinking about like 5-year-olds to 12, 13-year-olds, the main sources of that sense of well-being are going to come from parents, coaches, creating essentially like a healthy space for them to be involved in. And that really boils down to, again, the way you give feedback, how you talk about growth and progress, what you emphasize. And so focusing on things like effort, becoming better, self-care, those can all be things that promote well-being. And then as your athlete gets a little bit older, I think it's a great opportunity, even as young as 8 years old, honestly, to introduce some mental skills that they can start to use to get a sense of how to help themselves cope with things like adversity or deal with difficulty or failure. And so some of that might be as simple as having a constructive conversation after a tough loss, right? Asking the right questions like, hey, what did you love about today? What was your experience like versus, oh man, I can't believe that you did that out there. What were you thinking, right? Which is, of course, as a competitor, all of our natural instincts. So you have to kind of fight that, right? As a parent or coach and sort of work with the athlete to get to a healthy place themselves. And then you can introduce things around like mindfulness meditation, even if it's just 1 or 2 minutes of sitting still, closing your eyes, focusing on your breathing. That practice does make a difference for young kids. And then there are other things you can do, right? Set goals with them so they get a sense of how to make progress and can learn to help themselves. Talk to them about how they talk to themselves, right? Using self-talk strategies. You can even teach them simple breathing patterns. I mean, I have a friend who is another psychologist, and she taught her 1-year-old kid essentially how to do deep breathing when he was feeling overwhelmed. Like, you can teach young kids really practical strategies about how to cope when things are difficult. It just takes being intentional. So those would be some things I'd encourage everyone to think about. But the main one is really making sure that you're focusing on using more positive, uplifting, helpful language and working with your young athletes around who they're becoming.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed that often goes overlooked. And just speaking from experience, like I mentioned, having kids, having 3 young athletes, there's so many times where I have to catch myself I see their reaction and I'm tell them, you try and explain to them of how they should be acting or behaving or what they should be thinking. And I wonder, I'm like, why are they doing this in the first place? And as I pay more attention, I realize, well, they're just emulating what they saw me do. And I see myself in a lot of their actions, and it's really humbling. And it's quick to be able to notice in that venue of kids, man, they're just a sponge, and more times than not, they're going to soak up what they see and what they hear versus what they're being told to do. And so I think you're nailing that right on the head. And it's something that does go overlooked a lot of times, because how much time in the day do we truly spend reflecting and looking in the mirror at our own actions, and not so it's so much easier to point out the flaws in somebody else. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And it makes me think back to my amateur level. I was very lucky coming up in Kansas City with a baseball organization that prioritized this. They were intentional about giving us specific skills to develop our character in different traits that would help us to have success on the team, but also outside of the team and in other venues of life. And I didn't realize it at the time, but maybe you can talk about this, because I think it's so important as coaches to prepare, to have a structure in place for this environment, for the coaching atmosphere, whatever that is, if it's on the field, on the court. And I say this because with that baseball organization, we actually had at least once a month, most of the time twice a month, where we would get into a classroom setting. We would actually sit down away from the field, and we would go over these things. We would go over not just the game situations and the roles that the player is responsible for, but also the mindset, talking about the mental strategies and how to handle pressure, how to handle failure, how to handle success. And so maybe you could give us some practical ways that coaches can develop a healthy environment, not only to make it, fun and exciting, but also to positively affect mental health and mindset.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because it's part of the sport ecosystem, or part of the experience I think we kind of take for granted. But if you look at, the dynasty teams, right, they all talk about how important their culture was. And culture is sort of the word they use to describe the environment. But you think of Phil Jackson setting up time for mindfulness meditation. You think about some of the other historic dynasties that had their way of doing it. Nick Saban focusing on the process, like that kind of cultural attitude, right? Creating a space that feels very inviting, feels like it's aligned, is really, really important. And the data actually bears this out. There's a brilliantly smart researcher, friend of mine, a guy named Christopher Henriksen over in Denmark, who's done a ton of research on how the talent development environment, essentially the youth sport environment here, right, promotes high performance, or in some cases hinders it. So some of the basic things to think about are, one, getting everyone aligned on the values, the norms, the standards of the team, right? That means getting parents aligned around what it is that the coach is expecting. And again, you can do this at a really young age, right? If you're a coach who's thinking about creating a great positive experience for your young athletes, you may have to talk to parents about not being super overbearing, or not being overwhelmingly involved, or not yelling at the referee when you're out there on the pitch, right? Like, there's lots of things that you might have to actually coach the parents for, and that makes coaching youth sports really hard, right? But getting that alignment is critical. So step one is kind of creating alignment in the environment around those critical pillars. That means identifying some basic values, right? Like, what's going to live at the center of the experience you're creating? Is it fun? Is it competing? Is it excellence? Whatever. There's no right or wrong, right? It's about you and the team and what you want to embody and the experience you want to create, and then getting everyone bought into that. I think the second piece then is to translate those values into standards, right? What do we expect of people when they show up in the environment? And that's around how we communicate with each other. That's about showing up on time. That's about setting aside time for mental training, right? All of those things sort of dictate the way the environment's experience. And then it's really about aligning our actions every day with those standards and values, right? And if we can sort of keep that congruence as we go, we can create a really healthy, high-performing environment, again, even from a young age, because athletes are in a place that the values are clear, everyone's aligned and pulling in the same direction, there's a lot of support, and everyone understands what's expected. That's what goes into creating a healthy environment. Of course, it's very hard, right? Creating a good culture or an environment it's pretty hard to create, and it's pretty easy to tear down, right? One incongruent action can undermine a lot of what you built in an environment, but just getting back on track and trying again is really all that matters there. And so it's awesome to hear that you had an experience where they created that for you. And then tactically what that looks like, right? It might be some of these things you're recommending. It's setting up classroom time, setting aside time at the beginning or end of practice to do some mental skills work, inviting parents in a way that maybe you wouldn't have in the past, making sure all your assistant coaches really embody the same values and principles and standards that you want them to embody. Those are some things you can think about to make sure your environment feels fully put together, holistic, and aligned.
And I think, Alex, too, as we wrap up today, but it's important for us to understand that it's, Rome wasn't built in a day. Like, it's a consistency. It's the ability to stay, hey, this is who we are, almost as an identity of based on values as opposed to based on performance or outcomes, right? And we appreciate you on joining us today, man. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up the show today? And anything else you would like to say as for coaches, for parents, for mental health, culture, anything like that? What's your final words for today?
Man, that's like so many things to put final words on. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I just appreciate this opportunity to get on with you and share and appreciate the work you guys are doing to make the youth sports ecosystem, healthier and better. And I think, if there's one parting message for me, that's what I'm really hoping for, right? As I start to turn my attention to places like youth sports where I can make a difference, is thinking about how do we make this as positive, healthy, high performing as an experience as possible. And I think that's, for me, really critical, that those things can coexist, right? You can have mental health, you can have health and high performance all at once. You don't have to sacrifice one or the other. And so that would be my parting words, is encouraging coaches and parents to think about how do you create both versus choosing one or the other, which is sort of what we've, I think, historically been conditioned to believe is necessary. So again, appreciate the opportunity to join you guys, and hope we get to do it again soon.
Yeah,
Hey, and lastly,
real quick. Yeah, this has been awesome. I have to say, we're lucky to have someone like you, someone that's helped at the highest level, that you've coached athletes at the highest level, executives at the highest level, these professional sports teams. So yeah, we appreciate you sharing the message that we're passionate about, and it sounds like you're passionate about as well. Where can people find you? Where can we connect you and have people see what you're doing and learn more about the work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you can find me on social media, Twitter, or I guess it's X now, and LinkedIn, at Alex Auerbach, PhD, alexauerbach.com. I write a newsletter called Perform that'll probably be rebranded at some point, but for now it's still perform.alexauerbach.com. So you can find me there. And, I know we're going to talk about this at some point, Jason, but I'm cooking up a little bit of stuff for youth sports on the mental performance coaching side too. Because I think there's a real need there to build some of these skills into that ecosystem a bit more. So stay tuned. I'll share about that when it's live.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to diving into that material as well, Alex. And again, make sure you guys check out Alex's stuff. I'm a big fan of the things he posts on Twitter. It just really helps me think, and keep my mindset on it's for the kids. It's for the kids, right? Which is what youth sports should be all about. So, Trevor, man, great show as always. I'm excited about some of our guests coming up on the show. Make sure you follow Trevor on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn as well. And share the show with a coach, parent, or athlete in youth sports. It might just be the difference they need to help the kids that they're coaching, or even their own kids.
Yeah, be sure to check out 4dathletes.com. Check out our resources for parents, coaches, athletes. Follow 4D Athletes and Jason on social media as well. We have a lot of dynamic content coming your way. I know I've enjoyed this so much. I actually have recently went down a Reddit rabbit hole, and I saw this parent. He said the thread was, I got sucked into coaching this 8U team. Can anybody help me on some advice? I've never coached a youth team before, and I found myself writing out a prescription of, hey, this is how you should run your practice. These are some things that you can apply. So I know these conversations we're having, people are looking for them. So if you could please help us spread that word, share the show. We don't ask for a lot, but if you could do that. If you found this content interesting, or if it's helped you in some way, please share it with somebody. And if you have a question, write to us. Let us know what we can talk about. We have a lot of resources that we can bring your way. So we'll continue to do that. And thank you for tuning in today.
Yep, that's a wrap for this episode. And if you liked the episode, give it a 5-star rating and leave a review. Thanks for tuning in to Tuesdays with Trevor, and we will see you next time.